we're done with the schlepping up here. How's everybody doing? It's mid-morning panel. Woohoo! All right, everybody having a great show. All right, we're gonna try and put. I'm okay. If you have a little rum in there, I'll take it. But we you have to have energy. Anyway, we're going to really dig into a great conversation today that's going to start to put some of the pieces together that you were hearing yesterday and will be hearing today. Obviously, AI is the pretty girl at the party, but we're going to try and really break it into pieces so we understand how it's being applied to the pipeline and get into what metadata really means. So first, let's do just an intro to the panel, and we have a lot of you. So I know you can't tell your whole life story, but set up the stage for us about your roles and how it's relating to this topic.
Hi, is this working? Okay. Hi.
Oh yeah, everybody hold it at the top because the antenna's on the bottom.
Hello, I'm Helena Packer, and I'm vice president at DGene, a technology company that's doing R&D and production work in AI for films and commercials. My background is as a visual effects supervisor, and before that, an artist. It's nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Jon Weisner. I'm at Microsoft. I sit on our global black belt team. I own our high-performance compute and AI business for media and entertainment. I have coming up on 20 years at Microsoft, mostly media-centric services.
You look very young, by the way.
Thank you.
He has a portrait in his attic and tells a different story.
Yeah, it's true. Andy's my sidekick. You'll meet him in a second.
Why am I sitting between these two?
There's a reason.
It's in my contract.
And so the reason why my tenure is relevant here is because I've spent my time at Microsoft working on media-centric workflows. So metadata has been a pain for me for multiple decades now. So nice to meet you.
I'm Rhea Fischer. My pronouns are she, her. I am a technology manager at Netflix Animation. I have a long and painful history in virtual production real-time on set, including motion capture and such. And as such, a long history dealing with metadata and recently dealing with the pretty girl at the party, AI. So on to you.
I like the way you said pretty girl and then just gestured to me. My name's Andy Beach. I'm a Chief Technology Officer for Media and Entertainment at Microsoft. I oversee our overall technical strategy, work closely with Jon Weisner on the high-capacity compute side of the business, and really came out of the media industry, have a degree in film, have a lot of emotional scars around metadata and how it gets broken, and then how we try and fix it again, and how we try to stop throwing it away and actually move it along with the video and the audio along the way.
Hi, everyone. I'm JP Castel. I'm a CSO, strategy side at Evercast. And I basically lead our strategic roadmap. We're looking at AI a lot. Evercast is a video chat collaboration platform that's in the booth in front. And my background is I used to be a post producer, independent filmmaker. So I've done it all from all different parts of the VFX and post workflow. So.
Fantastic, and definitely check out their demo because you'll kind of be blown away when you see what it really does. And I hear all of you sort of introducing this subject with mentioning pain, and that it sounds like we all need a lot of therapy. But I'd like to break apart the pieces a little bit because people say metadata, and data means so many different things to so many different folks. So let's just take a stab at defining it. So let's start with you, Rhea. Tell us what metadata means.
Metadata to me is everything you want to know before you open a file, before you pay the cost of actually internalizing all the detail of the structure of this thing, before you spend the cost of having the application that is required to run it. Stop that.
Yeah.
So that's basically.
Okay, and Andy, did you want to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think metadata is such a loaded term because we're all using it in different ways, right? There's metadata about the film and who was in it, and sort of treating the content as an object. There's a lot of metadata around it. Then there's a ton of temporal metadata inside of it around all of the pieces. But then there's other data assets that live around it, and sometimes those get called metadata, even though we may not think of them as metadata on the production side for where it goes. So it's a super loaded term, and everybody means the best of it, but we're all using it in different ways and to talk about different things sometimes.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges, I think, even here today with everybody having different definitions. Did you guys want to add anything else to that?
I'll add, I mean, I think most people know what metadata is, but I think my hope is that it means standardization. We can only hope that, so we can work together to do that. So.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point, that metadata is also about the relationship of different units of information that's around. And I think a good point in terms of the versatility of the idea is that it also exists in a lot of domains. It exists in financial domains, technical domains, optical, VFX, all kinds of things. So it's not really a term that's limited to what do I capture. It's also like, in particular, it's who are the groups of people using it. Sorry.
And I will just say, I hope that the concept of metadata starts to change. We've been working around what metadata has been. In the past, I had spent, mid-90s, I was working for Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. And we were creating the digital library system of tens of thousands of both physical and digital assets. Metadata was a manual representation of what we knew on the surface of what was the contents of a media asset. As we move into AI, I think the context of what metadata is going to start to change so that we don't have to look on just the surface anymore. There's going to be a lot of automation, and we can probably get into it in the conversation here, where we no longer have to look just on the surface. There's going to be a lot of dimensional data that we're going to be able to extract from the content moving forward, a lot more comprehensively.
Yeah, and I think that relevant to that exact point is that this is really one of the places that AI comes in, which is that domain-specific AI that understands, as you mentioned, the context of something can do extraction that is, highly templated, well understood. That's a huge factor of I think where we're going to get into
Great,
metadata.
and we're going to talk about pieces of the pipeline, and we're going to talk about what types of AI we're using in those pieces. But I want to do one more definition. And just, could you guys separate out for me VFX and virtual production? Because virtual production is obviously what everyone's talking about, but there's also a lot of blending of those two terms. So just let's just talk about it. Who would like to take a stab?
Feels like it's I think you're the perfect one for it.
Sure. It's a Venn diagram, right? So there's, on the extreme side of virtual production, it's going to be application of, I think it's a definition that someone said on another stage, that's sort of bringing in the world of game engines and bringing the world of the something that you can fabricate and make as models or elements and bringing that to actual production, blending them together. Visual effects can help create elements that are in there, but visual effects on the other side of the landscape is taking footage that's been shot and adding to it, right?
Okay,
Completing.
So VFX could be part of virtual production.
Yeah, you could make
It's
assets.
its own thing.
I think it's a yes and, right? I think VFX sort of already existed, and now we're taking in this notion of, I think VFX traditionally was sort of a post-process only, whereas virtual production is pulling VFX into the production more directly, because we're now using systems that match backgrounds to actor movements, so that we feel like we're in a different environment than we're actually shooting in. That's that game engine technology that we're talking about, and that's that blending of the two. But it doesn't have to just be that. It's more.
Well, I think they just go together. One particular virtual production needs visual effects to support it, like in the Unreal Engine, you need to give it elements. So I think it's just becoming a blending. And I don't know if this should be a real differentiation.
And just to give a quick example of the previous session, feedback here, from the previous session from the Disney Plus folks and Magnopus, on the virtual production set of Remembering that they were just showing, there was a kind of a half joke of were there visual effects used on the stage? And the answer initially was no, but then it was corrected because there were visual effects elements that were on the virtual production wall that were then being shot on the virtual production stage. So just as an example of the Venn diagram, whether it's animation or visual effects, like those things can surface on a virtual production stage or other
Great.
shooting environment.
And the only reason I want to define this stuff is because, again, we're using language, and all these words mean so much to so many different people. So it's hard to get into these conversations without defining. Yeah.
Yeah, just to put a little cherry on top of this, the word production and virtual production is an important word because you have pre-production, production, and post. And virtual production was about making things that are not normally present in production present through a proxy, right? And that was in effect the virtualized aspect of it. When you do VFX, it was normally seen as a part of a building of content, right? You'd already built the foundation, you'd shot the footage. Now you're going to put, the wood frame up and everything else. So there was not really a sense of virtualness. It was really just a sense of, linear building. In virtual production, kind of the idea is that you have continuous proxies throughout the entire process. And the fun thing there is to think, well, you can virtualize all the way to the front of the pipeline. If I have a screenplay, I can actually, in a preliminary sense, break that up into sequences and shots without even having any images. And I can still make entire metadata lists of who's in that sequence. What are all the props in that sequence? And that is a form of virtualization or proxies, or proxies for things that gives you a sense of continuity through the pipeline that wouldn't exist if you didn't kind of think of that, virtualism kind of leaking out, to the other sides.
Point.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just high-fiving Rhea on that one because it absolutely
Love high-fiving the pretty girl.
agree that, thank you again for that. I'll owe you $5 if you say it one more time. But yeah, no, I mean, it's great to think of that line production work as like early seeds of the metadata work. Like, I doubt that the line producers think of the call sheets and contact lists as metadata, but ultimately that's what it is because it's shortened information that describes the scene in the moment without getting into all of the details.
Yeah, I mean, that lets you think of it as an evolution from the very first moment all the way to the end.
Great. And you're setting me up now for, let's really talk about the pipeline, okay? Because I actually wanted to throw up on the screen for you guys a pipeline so we could talk about it. But oh my God, if you Google or chat GPT or do anything with pipeline.
Bing chat.
Sorry, Bing, which is a enterprise solution for.
Don't be that
So
guy.
whatever you want to use, it's fine. But if you
Don't
want
be
the
that
best
guy.
experience,
Come on.
But yeah, well, you guys are sort of paying for today. Anyway, so let's talk about the pipeline. So for this, we're just going to really simplify it, and we're going to do pre-production and post. But trust me, I understand it's much more different than that, and especially now with virtual production, where we're kind of shifting what we used to think was post into the front. But let's talk about pre-production. Let's start with you. And again, now we know we've defined metadata, we've sort of defined VFX, virtual production. Tell me, when you're thinking about applying AI to those areas in pre-production, what's triggers for you? You're deep in this area.
Well, it all begins in pre-production. So you begin with a script or an idea, a treatment. So all of that needs to be, it gets lost in the pipeline, or it can. So you want to keep track of each element, and metadata is very important to that. And again, AI, or maybe for the first time, AI doesn't stand on its own yet. So it needs the support of all of us, all the visual effects pipeline as it changes the pipeline.
And is there some intern going there and going, okay, we've greenlit this script, it's pre-production time, I'm just going to enter in, brown hair and outside location, or what's where in pre-production, who's getting that stuff in?
It's a changing process, but you go through a formal breakdown, script breakdown, basically. And it could be part of the way you finance your project, specifically because you're going to basically go through every scene and you're going to do a breakdown. You're going to say, hey, this car, the Batmobile, exists in 17 scenes. And then you'll start to schedule out based on those assets or talent or other variables. But I think the big thing to consider here is that this is where my mind has changed from being production and now working in a technology company, is that you really want to be careful that these aren't created in closed systems, right? If like perfect example of this, we all used to use Microsoft Word, but still use it, right? And when that was a closed system, you're just saving it on your desktop, and there's no way that AI or anything could access that, right? But these things are now moving to a connected system that you want your footage in the future potentially understand the script's location and its context or a breakdown. But I think the industry is full of technology that's very segregated, right? And creating a standardization between them is the big task, if that makes sense. But yeah, you break down the script essentially.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And like, if you think about it, like we've always had interoperability and standards around the video and the audio, because without that, there's not a lot of point in shooting anything if you can't watch it anywhere else. But we haven't had that same interoperability around the data. So if you did a ton of script breakdown, you weren't really using that in like you were using it in production, but the post team didn't necessarily have access to it. They were going and creating a whole new set of metadata to drive search around all of the information to get through the post process. And then the team that manages the catalog is probably creating a whole different set of metadata that is almost identical to that stuff. But it's like we keep dropping metadata at every
Totally.
stage, and we just pass along the video and the audio essence and think that it's okay. And we've stopped thinking that way. And now we're shifting to, well, yeah, we need data interoperability too. And the data has to follow the content along the way.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a part of the context-specific validity of metadata. One of the things working in pipelines at Sony ImageWorks and, all these other places is that you see that metadata that you extract in one step of the pipeline, say shooting from the camera takes, is really valuable to the next level of people in the pipeline. But the people after that, it's number one, it's usually gone, or it's not really relevant anymore. And I think that that transportability of this kind of second layer of reality about what's going on in the shoot would be really valuable.
So there are a few things that have continued to evolve that I believe are really going to start to change process. First is, for many years, we've been working on kind of this notion of big data. Data's never, and I think we've heard in lots of sessions here, data's never really been applied to this business or been applied really well to this business. In the world of big data, regardless of industry segment, you can't have a ton of data and get value from it if you don't have easy ways to get insight from it. So a lot of the data visualization tools that have evolved, including but not limited to ours, we have things like Power BI, which essentially take very large data platforms and quickly represent it in visual form. And the reason why you want that is so that you can very quickly see that things are either operating normally or that there are anomalies that you need to go tend to or whatever. Like, we are a very visual audience, both as a consumer, but also as employees in what we do. But besides the data platforms and the visualization tools, now there's an opportunity with AI to have AIs, not just one, but a collection of AIs that, like any production crew, where you have one person that is trained and skilled in one area, another person that you hire for a completely different reason, for different skill sets, do something else. You have a collection of AIs that are listening. And for the pre-production side of the house, I really view it as ingest. It's listening. You're feeding it, you're prompting it, you're adding scripts, you're adding timelines, you're adding resources in terms of people and locations and all these other things. So these AIs are going to be listening and stitching together pieces of data that ultimately are going to stitch together people and processes as part of the pre-production process. And so part of it is, where are we today? What are the tools that we're using today? But what are the tools that are here that we can use differently so that we can start to be change agents and not have a conversation of how painful it's been in the past? Let's deal with new pain.
Yeah, one really key thing about that is that we are visual, but we like to, when I communicate to you, I don't usually, I say words and then maybe you draw. That's a very common sort of, process in filmmaking, right? I am the director and I say something and you draw it on a storyboard, or, you respond to a note. all of our user interfaces that we use to access things like visualization tools and everything look like airplane cockpits. And this is like the most terrifying thing if you're not a pilot, right? Or an operator or something. So I think one of the great things that could exist in the space of metadata and AI, or I'll use the word Bing, is if I could tell Bing, please give me a visualization of something, and I could actually talk to Bing about what I want to see, as opposed to be confronted with an airplane cockpit and I have to go through my
Right.
pre-flight, make sure there's gas in the tank, learn that I have to have the flaps down and
And that's one, oh, sorry.
So no, go ahead, and then we'll
So
go. I want to
that's-
hear some examples of pre-production AI application too.
Yeah, so that's one thing that you can do with Bing Chat today or OpenAI or other models is you can now be in control of how you want the information that you're requesting rendered to you. So you can go today and you can try and say, hey, I want this information. Give me the top, 20 visual effects companies in the following region, but give it to me in a table format and add the following pieces of information. So if you are someone who likes information in a table format, it can do that. If you want it in a mind map, you can do that. Over time, things are going to get better. So much so that if you were to hire your own assistant and tell your assistant how you like that information provided to you, these things are going to be able to do that. And just in terms of pre-production and the example, so across a series of advertising agencies who do pitch decks, as an example, they're looking to automate the previs process, particularly creating storyboards and or animatics, not for the purpose of production, but for the purpose of being able to pitch to their clients. So instead of it taking weeks and or months to create an animatic or 3 to pitch to the client to try to win that project, you have an ability to go leverage not just text to image, but text to video, and essentially, ultimately, from a solution perspective, a text to animatic that allows you to accelerate going from concept to previs in the form of visual storytelling. Again, not for production, but from a pre-production perspective.
Yeah, Helena, I know you want to.
Yeah, because all of this is at the service of the storyteller. It doesn't, any of this does not exist unless you're making a product, a movie. So for artists, for any kind of visual artist or a writer to use this, director, they have to be incentivized in a way that speaks to them, that keeps them in the creative zone, or they'll reject it.
Oh, that's a really good point. Andy?
Yeah, I love the examples that John was giving around the sort of text to image, text to video. I don't want to, we shouldn't lose out on or underscore the text to text capabilities that AI has. One of the first use cases that I found wildly helpful was just that script breakdown work of being able to hand it a URL that's a script, even if it's just one that's in flight, and being able to do queries around, which characters are together in which scenes, which props are needed, because that does start helping build out those tables and that data, but also having it as something that's queryable, being able to ask in natural language, about this, and then once you have a lot of scripts, particularly in a large universe, then being able to feed it a new script and ask questions of hey, would this character use a gun, or would it use a sword, or would something else, is this in canon effectively, is a huge value saver, not because we're not already doing that work, but we're saving time, and we're using the system as basically a virtual assistant to speed up that process.
That's great.
Yeah, I'd love to go back to what Helena said, though, and I think that's something we really can't lose sight of in this, which is this is in service of the storyteller. And in the realm of ideation, which is the one that you're referring to with, creating options for a client, this is a sort of an arm's length relationship between an agency and a customer. I think that if you talk about AI in service of a storyteller, that's a much more direct feedback loop. And one of the most challenging things, if any of you have ever tried with AI, is to say, I know what I want, I just want to get AI to draw it almost impossible, right?
It's that prompt engineering that we all keep hearing about.
Yeah, good luck. I
Yeah, that's. I think these are really really important points. And the big takeaway I think we're all getting is that there is talent that is needed to use these AI engines. JP, I want to jump over to you and jump into production now, because you were sharing with me yesterday literally ways that you're using Evercast in production, leveraging AI and metadata. So just give us some examples so that people really understand how this is working.
Yeah, my view on production. So as you've gotten your financing and now you're actually going to be shooting and gone through all of pre, is really surrounding around your dailies medium or whatever medium you're shooting in, right? I'll use a traditional film as an example, right? So if I'm shooting on a red or an Arri or even Blackmagic as in here, right? Creating a file, original file, and that's going to live somewhere, right? Through a DIT on a set that's going to be captured, categorized, put on a giant hard drive, maybe sent to a facility. But there's new technologies like camera to cloud on many different platforms where a smaller version, a dailies or an offline version of that will go into a cloud either automatically or be uploaded later. And I think that is a resource of all that information in that clip that we can look at. If you have certain applications, you can figure out, really easily like what size it is, what frame rate it is, but there's even more things you can build in, like what scene was it, what script, what part of the script, what characters could be in there. And so that is such a great asset for AI to look at, right? Or even take pieces from different infrastructures and build creatively like a standard that makes sense, right? Because there's something we were talking about even from it's funny how many projects I've worked on where the scene numbers we got were from the audio guy. You know what I mean? Like the wave files, because he was just on it because he's reading the script or he or she, right? So I think that kind of standardization, if the AI could look at that and add that to all of your dailies,
Yeah, and sorry.
Oh, the sound guy's the least visually distracted on set, right? I mean, that's like one of the reasons.
Totally.
But there are 2 points you brought that are kind of interesting. One is that the size of a raw file out of an area or something like that is one of the key reasons for metadata, right? Is that once you have that enormous original file from the camera, which it's even challenging to look at without some interpretation of color or something like that, you don't really want to open it. You really want to deal with it in the abstract. So it's a super motivator for metadata. But now our tools are so cheap and so capacious that we don't really have that kind of threat anymore. Right. So
Love that word, capacious. That's awesome. I haven't heard that in the last 2 days. Let's hear it for a new word.
Somebody's playing Wordle.
That's great. You were going to say something, John?
So it's an extraordinary time because we get to live with a lot of the base reference data that we, I guess, have come to love and hate. But it just is both automatic and manual, right? I mean, even just from the kind of the semantics you mentioned in the metadata structure, it's one collection of information. The benefit that we have is that we have systems like Evercast and others that will help to automate ingesting that. If you complement that, not necessarily replace it, but if you complement it now, there's a tool which actually you can go check out. I'm pretty sure the URL is aka.ms/Vision Studio. So this is based on Microsoft Cognitive Services video indexer, or at least that was the previous name of it. And what this does now is look essentially at every frame as it comes by with computer vision. And it will detect not just objects and faces and other elements in the scene and automatically generate metadata and then slot it in as data into tables. It will also add layers of context. So it'll start to compare what elements and people are in scenes and what exactly is happening. So one of the demos on that site that you can go interact with is a scenario of a convenience store and people roaming around in there, and there's someone who's picking up something and accidentally drops, I don't know, a bottle of apple juice or something. Crashes on the floor, splashes, someone comes and mops it up. So with no metadata generated for this scene, you're now running vector-based search. And without going on into the technical details, that vector-based search is now something that really is going to exponentially expand what we've dealt with around metadata in the past and is really going to help us get towards a place where those frames, those pictures, those pixels that all collectively get put together for a computer vision solution to look at is going to help us get deeper into the content that's in there, both from a previs perspective and a production perspective. And it's also going to be able to, from a vector-based data perspective, it's going to help us start to get connected into all different dimensions of the production process.
That's an archive dream right there. Think about all of you who are sitting on, billions of hours of video in your libraries from all your work. And now you can actually use tools like that to actually, take it apart. Yes, go ahead, Ray, and then I want to talk to you.
Some of our film auteurs are so specific that I think that we're going to need AIs trained on Kubrick or Hitchcock or something like that specifically, right?
That's the next
very true.
question.
Right, that's a filter. Tell me some examples of how it's being used in production with you guys.
Metadata?
Yeah.
Um,
And AI, our friend AI.
Well, it's used throughout, but it's still a confusing process because there's big gaps and then people start naming things different things all the way through the process. So AI would be very, very good in tracking all this information. Primarily, we're using AI to create images right now, but being able to keep track of what you have in a film is a huge process, and it's lost once the film wraps. It's all gone. So AI would be very, very good for that.
Andy, I just want to ask you, in the C-suite, do you think we're going to eventually get a chief metadata officer? Is this what a company needs?
Well, I mean, so there's already often sort of CIOs or even CDOs at times around this, and I think they've looked at more of the higher level abstract data. But I think this metadata and this notion of getting more sort of into the frame and into the time and into the objects that are in there become part of that job long term, and it lives somewhere between the IT world and the production world. It sort of has a foot in both camps, and I love the way you were saying that you're using it for keeping track, you're using it for creating lookbooks and images and other ideas. It reinforces that point that the AI side of this is not one big AI that goes and solves and walks and talks and does everything. It's thousands of little AIs that are solving the one minor problem over here and then collectively sort of lifts the boat on everything.
And JP, I just want to ask you one more question again, because yesterday you gave me these great examples of how your people are remotely working and they're streaming to each other, and that data, that metadata is just saving all these crazy shoots that are global. And can you just give an example of one of those situations?
Yeah, so at Evercast, we stream any type of content in high quality. And so the next thing is that people are they're having spotting sessions in a very basic sense, right? And they're giving notes that you would normally scribble down on a piece of paper and try and remember what time code was at, right? But those notes we want to translate into that media, whether it's from an NLE, whether it's from Unreal, whether it's on an actual file DAM basis, right? And that's kind of the step one, but the next step as you go down is like, maybe there's a little bit of an audit history as to when you watched that, because I know who was in the room that watched that, right? And when you extend that into read content and things like this, like that's really important, right? And it might be important to know, when was this used as a stock footage for something? And I think I'm gonna jump back to the question you asked the gentleman here is I think it's really not maybe a CMO of the future, it's the CFO, because I'll give you a practical example, right? Like a lot of studios are building assets from their second units across productions where they can go in and they can say, hey, I need a shot of this one area, of this one scene, of this actor, and I wanna see if I have it practically, or I just need a big shot of nighttime, the UK, right? Because it's gonna be in our movie. And a lot of films have that, and they don't know that they don't even know that they have that stock available. So AI can crawl through these things, identify cities, location, actors, things like this, and then you can just pull up that and you've already paid for it, right? Similarly, in a virtual production environment, if I invested a lot of money to make a rock that's very specific to a type of world like Tatooine, I can go find that and then place that in my visual effects and my next virtual volume. Like I own that, right? And that's metadata will help create that entire trackable system.
And so just jumping off of that, there's a large studio that's here.
That rhymes with?
that's here. And they called one day and said, hey, Jon, we've got a lot of historical data from our productions, right? We've created all these assets. We know exactly what the resources, both human and technical, are that were required at the time to deliver on these elements within these scenes. We don't do anything with this data. We have it, but we don't do anything with it. And we believe that moving forward, we need to be more competitive in our bidding process, going after net new projects. How do we connect this in? And so the insight that I think a number of studios are looking at today, and perhaps more studios in the future, hopefully, will look at, is how do we take the insight and knowledge based on historical data, and instead of manually peering through it and trying to make sense of it, how do we essentially take the scope of the next project and pump it into an AI or a collection of AIs that says, based on our historical delivery of these elements that are required for this new project, here's how many artists it took, here's how much render time it took, here's ultimately the total cost, cost of goods to deliver were on those projects, and help the CFO office, help the VFX soups and everyone else ultimately arrive at a more refined and hopefully a higher probability quality number that could then be put into the bid going back. And so right now that's very disconnected. And so just, to your point, being able to complement it and dig back into that historical data is a dream.
And Helena, you wanted to add?
A couple of things, riffing off what you said. If these elements were, a rock, were available in some format very, very quickly. Okay, so you get a list through metadata of all the available rocks. You need to see them in the scene. So if you could, do a preview within Unreal or a similar system, that would be very valuable. The other place I really think metadata will start being very important is tracking color. And color is a huge problem in producing versions for distribution. And if there's a way through metadata to keep the original intent of the cinematographer and take it all the way through distribution.
I love how you guys keep pulling it back to the creative side of this. And let's pop back. Oh, you're so welcome. Creative side. Oh, you were going to clap again. Yeah, I wanted to hit you again because I know you want to come.
I think we're talking about rocks, but I think like one example of metadata would be to say, okay, well, we have all this raw footage, but we have to replace an actor. Find me all the sequences or all the takes that this person that we have to, and then from there we can determine, well, are we going to do this in some sort of a digital replacement, or are we going to do this like, with a reshoot? What makes sense, and model that out. So these are the kind of things that happen a lot in certain companies which shall remain nameless,
real world cases, yeah.
It would be very, very important to use that kind of AI in training for things like deepfakes or environments.
Yeah, great. So all these things are going to inform other opportunities. All right, let's go to post, because we often fix it in post. It's not even noon yet. All right. Andy, did you want to jump into post? Give us some post examples.
Well, I feel like that is an area where the metadata, because you're dealing with so much content, and that the metadata that they generate a lot, they take some off cameras and other areas, and they've used it strategically to make the editor's job easier for a while. And I feel like we're seeing AI automate a lot more of those processes, getting transcripts that are more ready, even giving them the ability to do an edit by text versus visually for initial rough cuts is huge. Even some of the work that Stanford and Adobe did a couple of years ago, where they were actually just handing a bunch of raw assets to various algorithms that were trained and saying, all right, give me the rom-com style of this edit, give me the dramatic version of this edit, and being able to, just experiment with like, how does the raw footage look treated in these different styles that that, are classic visual languages that, we've taught in film school, and we can now train models against to help speed up that process. Because again, it's not, we always get worried about replacing. None of this is ever really replacing. It's enhancing and allowing us to focus on other parts of the creative process more, and taking away things that tend to be more of the mundane parts of the work.
That's great. I wanted to also ask you guys, and I know you all want to talk a little bit about posts, but do we have to be concerned about who is doing the meta tagging? So it's not just one gender, and one ethnicity, because that obviously is a big AI challenge right now. So is that something that's coming up too, that we make sure we meta tag for the world instead of just, the popular majority? Anybody want to jump on that one?
I guess just the generic comment is, I think a lot of people, because natural language as an interface is here, the surface area of people touching AI is just exponential over the last several months. A lot of these, you've heard over the sessions, a lot of the AI has not just been recently developed, right? These things have been hanging out there independently. But the access to it through natural language is what's allowing a lot of us to connect with what has been a very complex process to connect with and try in the past. I think as we go try it, I think part of the danger is that you go and you try something, oh, I can create an image, or I can throw a log line in and generate a script. And everyone's like waiting for this magical thing to happen. And they're expecting this A+ quality something to be generated. And I think a lot of people are getting a result of, wow, I'm underwhelmed. And so a lot of it is around prompt engineering and not having the context of like, well, you need to have some skills to be able to prompt it in the right way. And my point in answering the question is, things are going to change. No one really has applied training to these AI models. A lot of people just going to use the existing model today, expecting the result that they want. As you apply training, particularly training in the context and comprehension that you want, the AIs are capable, right? There's nothing that says you can't train the object who is a person to be constructed in the following descriptions, right? I mean, it's metadata, right, for so many different things. So I guess I'm wanting to make the point that we're not stuck where we are today in AI. This is going to be an evolution, and in a lot of cases, like, we're in pre-production mode of AI.
Nice. I like the way you did that.
Yeah. Relevant to VFX, what is like the most important metadata in VFX? It's the notes. It's the completion, right?
JP's shaking, yeah.
And the thing is, and the thing that's interesting here to me is like, how well does an AI take notes? Like receive,
I don't know if it's the notes. I think for me, as a visual effects supervisor, it was always the camera information. The notes are very varied, and it's good to keep track of them because they will change each day. Same person. But there was something I wanted to talk about that you asked about being careful on how we train. I think AI will take on all the prejudices of our society because it is going to take in all of that. And we probably are going to need gatekeepers. And think also what you were talking about are closed circuit AIs that train on very specific things. So legally you can use them.
That's a great point. My AI is going to have a bad attitude. Okay. You wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say one of the most horrifying things that you realize about AI image generation is whenever you ask it to generate an image of a woman, you realize that AI has perfectly internalized the male gaze. This is absolutely like, and in terms of like getting what you want out of an AI, I mean, if you're not an adolescent male and you're asking for an image of a woman, it's challenging, right? And so this is kind of like part of the reason I mentioned notes, which yes, they do change and things like that. But in terms of being able to work with an AI to iterate towards something you want, I think that that is a good example of you're fighting against exactly the prejudices that you mentioned that are embedded in this. And I also want to give a shout out obliquely. I want to give a shout out to 1984, Apple, a little video called Knowledge Navigator, little guy in a bow tie on a screen on a flat panel display, before laptops, before iPads, before everything else. It was the right way to do it. And I think that we kind of need to go back to a vision that people had that long ago, almost 40 years ago at this point, before they had all the prejudices of how AI works now, and look at, in the domain of a personal assistant, in that case for a college professor, like how could this work? A conversational interface with visual feedback and a personal presence. I think that if Microsoft, like took that on as something that said like, hey, we want to integrate all our applications with that kind of, God forbid, I won't say the word
Clippy.
Clippy.
I loved Clippy. Clippy was my friend in
I
college.
was going to make the reference.
Well, there's a lot of people who just say ChatGPT is Clippy in a new disguise, really. I think to go back to the question around like where the inherent racism, sexism, and others that the AI may bring with it. I think what is great about this, I think we all acknowledge that like it is just a reflection of what society has, because that is what it is trained on. And I will argue that it has been true of lots of things. There was a great article years ago that came out about how color photography, when it was first developed, all of the models that it was tested against were white and blonde, and therefore it had a horrible early start with people of color and anybody that didn't fit into that like Germanic style. And it took 50 or 60 years before we really had conversations around that. Now, within hours of our AI being racist or misogynistic, we're having the conversation. So I think it's going to be there. And I think the way we solve it is that we are open and we are mindful about how we approach it, and we look to acknowledge it and then solve it together.
That's great. I want to ask one more question before we go to the audience, but I'm just wondering if you guys, because the creatives were excited about being part of this process, are you finding, or any of you finding that when you talk to creatives, they're asking about the metadata and how AI is going to help? Are they inquiring about this? Is this something that's part of their lexicon, or are we still too early in this process?
I think it's a lot of fear right now, especially with what's currently going on in the industry. But I kind of wanted to step back and kind of do a bigger overview, because I've kind of a lot to say a little on this. But I think there's a lot of lack of education around AI, and that's where the fear is, right? And the important thing is that AI is a nice, sexy term for machine learning, which has been around for a long time. And it was in the context of sub-Saharan Africa is very hot. Let's feed it all of the like hot data for the last 10 years, and let's figure out what's going to happen in the next 10 years, right? Those types of models, and they're all dependent on a data set, right? So the important part is like, where is that data set coming from, right? Because that's what's going to train it to be racist, or what's going to train it to do whatever it's intended to do, right? And the fear of that is the control of that basis, right? Because the model is just the engine of how I learn it, but if I'm going to train it on a subset, I want control over that. And I think the fear comes from the fact that, I'm a producer. If I buy your movie, right, I own it, right? And I can use it for purposes, just the same way that I can use it to make my own trailer and things like this. I could train an AI using that model. But what's happening now, because it's the Wild West, is AIs are training on everything, right? And we have no idea what context of the movie that I own versus the movie that someone else owned, what percentage of context that has. But that should be possible, right? We should be able to learn, oh, hey, this script that I AI'd used 55% of The Godfather, right? And maybe that 55% constitutes a royalty, as an example, right? Or other types of ideas, or maybe I think that's the fabric, and that control of like that specific system is training on is what needs to be figured out, and it will be figured out legally through battles that we're going to see in the next year or so, and there'll be some context there. But I think that understanding of it being a tool in that way, and that there's protection once that happens, will then make creatives be really excited to use it, because right now they feel that I've heard a lot of fear that I could make something and then someone else can make a derivative, and I have no control over that.
Right, that's a great point too. All right, let's go to the audience, because you got some smarties here on stage. So do we have any questions about metadata here and a part of this VFX and post pipeline that we're trying to break down into
I
pieces?
see one hand in the back over
Yeah,
there.
please, can you stand up? Because I'm not running to you with the mic. Yeah. Or you can come closer to me if you like.
I think I would argue that we've had a non-synthetic intelligence on set in the script. And ultimately, the script supervisor is the sort of person who keeps all of what we would consider to be metadata, and also is tied to a human readable piece of metadata we've had since the beginning, which is the slate. And ultimately, I'm wondering, you know, I've seen a lot of things like Scripty and some other things. Do you know of anything where they're trying to kind of train? If you guys have ever seen how a script supervisor marks up a script on set.
Right.
It's very arcane, very weird, but actually has been around for many, many
Color
years.
coordinated
And
link-
squiggly
right.
lines for coverage and all
Exactly.
that kind of stuff. Is there anything that people are working on in that domain?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so actually Microsoft has technology that isn't even specific to the media world called Form Recognizer. And it's just an early version of being able to scan existing pages of documents, whether it's a contract, a script, or something else, and take and understand like what are the different objects and actions within it, translating the handwritten notes and the other marks that might exist, and looking for the correlation between those over time. So we've used that Form Recognizer technology to do similar analysis of both slates, of script breakdowns, of script notes from supervisors at various projects. It's nothing that we like. Again, because Microsoft is, you know, the technologies we have tend to be relatively horizontal. Like the same form recognizer gets used by financial services to look at contracts. So they tend to make it generic, and then how a studio or production company chooses to integrate it as a service becomes their version of how they're using it to do that kind of work.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize something. So we are, from a Microsoft perspective, we're a platform company, right? We want to build and deliver capabilities. And from a cloud perspective, we want to be able to have that be accessible all over the world. The reason why we're here is because we, Andy, myself, Simon, others at Microsoft, working with AMD, all the ISVs around town, we want to work with the industry directly through education and understand what solutions are needed so that we can then reverse engineer back, right? We've got lots of components that we can assemble. And it's the orchestration, it's the gluing together and then the orchestration of those things. Now knowing that one of those components can be AI or multiple components can be AI. But for us, we're really all about just generating and delivering these solutions that are valuable. So from a script supervision perspective or any other facet of the creative process, the more that we can understand where the challenges are, the more we can offer up what is kind of a bill of materials. Like, hey, take service A, B, and C, put it together, and this is likely to be a really great tool for you to explore. And let's work together and figure out how valuable it is as a script supervision tool.
That's great.
That's really the approach that we're trying to take.
John, do you want to give everyone your mobile phone number so they can contact you?
It's Andy's.
Okay.
Very kind of you.
Ray, did you
My
want
Instagram.
to talk about where is Netflix using any of these types of tools right now when a project comes in? Is there a standard way you guys handle a project
I
through?
can neither confirm nor deny any use of AI in it. No, I mean, like any company out there, we're exploring all this stuff and trying to understand where it fits in well. But going back just really quickly, I think that the most important thing we're looking at is how AI and an artist or creative interacts, right? Like, what is it, you know, how does an artist trying to accomplish something integrate AI into what they're doing? And there's some really great workflows right now on YouTube and things like that. You see all, you know, artists where they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to generate an image and then holding the seed for the, you know, for the alternate, you know, generation constant. And then I'm generating multiple, you know, like views from a head, from the front side, and then I'm bringing that into Blender and I'm snapping grids to it and I'm making, you know, that, I mean, that's a workable process using AI, right? As opposed to, you know, something very, very general. I also just want to mention the other thing about training AI that's so challenging is that especially some of the best models out there are trained on like 10 petabytes of data. How do you curate 10 petabytes of, you know, data from the internet to reduce, racism. This is such an endemic problem with this mass technology at scale. We will solve it, but I'm just going to say, I'm just pointing out that it's not easy, and it really is something that's burned into us.
Let's do a lightning round because we have a couple of minutes left just going down the pike here. What you would like filmmakers maybe to do to jump into this metadata game so they can use AI in the production process? Any advice, JP? Ideas?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm gonna go to the first question. Like that idea, like that's a business, right? Like that's a full business. And if you wait for the big guys to do it, they won't, right? And if they do, they're gonna make it into a proprietary sense. And maybe this is me being an indie producer or being part of a startup. Like Azure has the services, they have the hosting, because it's incredibly difficult to crunch these numbers out. So like, and I've gotten script supervisors. They use iPads and they give you a nice little PDF printout, but it just lives in that space. And maybe an assistant editor will look at it. That's a perfect opportunity to take that, use a service to scan it, and then bind it. Maybe make a plugin for Resolve or Premiere that adds that to that standard or the ecosystem standard as an example. So that's what you should do. Use these tools to create a business like that. That's an opportunity,
Andy?
Well, great one. And as I quickly try and say it, I'll give a plug. If someone wants to see things like that startups are already doing, go check out the producer.io, who is a Microsoft startup that seed fund, who is doing work to use AI and technology to effectively help line producers manage production life cycles. I think overall for filmmakers though, and metadata, I would say, don't over-index on worrying about metadata. Just kind of think about the fact that everything you're working with is metadata to some degree, and you're going to be using AI in the future to interpolate it into something for the machine or for the next part of the process to learn and understand. And if you think of it that way, again, the AI is your assistant that is helping you here to do that work so that you don't have to overthink how you structure that metadata.
Great point, Rhea.
Yeah, just really quickly, if you hire a scriptie and they're on set and they're working, it is literally written into their contract how they're going to deliver their metadata to you, and it's usually in the form of a PDF. This is why bringing up the idea of like a form reader to extract that is interesting. You have to also be really careful that that's legal for you to do, right? And this is actually where we get into the tricky place of workflow in a legal sense and metadata, which has been traditionally a problem for virtual production because virtual production has been shut out of a lot of advantages that it could bring to production because linear workflow is literally written into the legal contract structure of most productions, right? I can't, as a post house, begin working on a sequence until I receive a turnover and an art package as part of a contract and things like that, right? And then I have to return my footage, on a particular schedule and in a particular format and everything. This is all written into the contract. So that's something to consider when you say, yes, metadata is cool, but also your legal contracts and your workflow and how that's structured may really kind of put you in an interesting position with respect to how you can and can't use that.
That's a great point. Lawyers will always have jobs.
Their AI is assured.
I got so many things I want to say, but I won't. So just on the legal front, just know you can take the terms and conditions of the contract that's specific to the project that you're working on and train it. Train the model that you're working with so that it can work with you as a support mechanism to remind you that the terms and conditions in project A allow you or deny you the ability to do blah, blah, blah. If you go try to do something this way, it will provide you some notification that says, hey, I know you want to do it this way. You can't do it this way because of the contract, but here are some other methods that that are within the terms and conditions that you can use. Would you like to use one of these, right? So that's just one example.
It's legal loophole AI.
It's not it's another business. So the other point I just wanted to make is it's a gold rush right now, right? So these small ideas, these ideas that you think are really small, the little piece of workflow or process that you have in your mind is gold because it's the things that big companies like a Microsoft don't have. It's not our core competency. We happen to know the business, but we serve as a bridge between billions of dollars of compute that's sitting all across the world that's ready to do something, but it's waiting to understand what it is that you need it to do.
It's capacious.
Oh, I love
Way to
that.
bring it back.
Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, gold mine, gold rush, find your gold, and
gold.
and gold. So just in terms of connecting,
Go for the gold.
LinkedIn, use Andy's LinkedIn first, but then also use mine, and just put at the beginning, met you at Production Summit, or just something.
Wonderful. Wrap it up for us, my darling.
I think that really the important thing is not to let the tail wag the dog. You have to talk to the creatives, and just presenting them and saying, well, here, take these tools and you figure out how you want to use them. They will not have time for that. They will have no interest in that. You need to talk to them up front, I believe, and create tools that are there for them to grab and use.
Thank you. Great point. I just want to thank all of you. I know this was a big topic, but I really appreciate how you each shared, your insights, and I think everyone learned a lot. So let's have a big hand for our panel here. I just want to remind everybody to definitely follow up and get in touch with these speakers. And also, at the end of the day today is a wrap party with the Spasmatics. So hopefully you bring your 80s vibe and you hang out, and you can also bring colleagues to the party tonight. All right, everybody. We'll be back in about 10 minutes with a panel from Weta, the fabulous Weta, who